But yeah, we've heard all those things. So really quickly, I'm Gary Denoise. I'm a director in the Office 365 team. As was said earlier, I've been at Microsoft for 10 years. I actually been in the online services team since its inception in 2008, I think it was, with something called BPOS. Who remembers that? What did it stand for? Who said that? You did? You get the first shirt. What size, large or extra large? Large. All right, well done. Come on up and get your first shirt. That's awesome. And then we moved to Office 365, which is where we are now, and we all love Office 365, and I've got my colleague here, Steve.
Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Wynn. I'm an Office 365 Customer Success Manager, so I help our customers with usage and adoption of Office 365. I came from the Yammer team, so I joined Microsoft as part of the Yammer acquisition. So all told, with my Yammer time and my Microsoft time, I'm relatively young at Microsoft, 3 years at Microsoft. So before we get too far, I'm just curious, how many of you guys attended the Delve roadmap session with Jem and Ashok and Frederick yesterday? Okay. I know some people got turned away from that session. It got quite full. We will cover a few of the roadmap items that they talked about in their session yesterday. We're not going to do kind of full demos like they were able to do. So I encourage you, if you are interested in the full roadmap, please refer back to that the recording of that session that they did yesterday.
We are going to show one roadmap item at the end that they didn't show.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it's very cool.
We are
so
going
stay
to show
till the
something
end.
we did not show. Yeah. So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about kind of the modern way of working, or this new world of work. Then we're going to set a little baseline of how the Office Graph works. I know a lot of you raised your hand, you're familiar with Delve, but we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the underlying Office Graph that makes it all kind of work. Then we're going to talk about making Delve work for you. And we think this is the part that's a little bit different than what you heard from Jem and Ashok and Frederick's session yesterday. We're going to talk about real scenarios, and Gary's going to walk through some real scenarios by which you can think about incorporating Delve into your workflow today. And then we're going to talk about what's coming. We're going to show, like I said, some of the roadmap things, and then some of the things that the Delve team is working on. So is this news to anybody? The world has changed. You guys have probably seen this slide a million times over the last 3 days already. But if we think back to the 1990s, when Microsoft's early vision was to have a PC in every home, a lofty goal, right? We thought so at the time. But look where we're at today. Most of you have multiple devices or multiple computers in your home, multiple tablets. And I was talking with a friend yesterday about the Apple Watch, and this is what he said to me. He said, I wear a Rolex. I'm not about to give that up so I can wear a computer on my wrist. To which I said, first world problem. But the point to that is that technology has become so ubiquitous that technology is really informing and changing the way that we make decisions about fashion, or the way that we connect with our family, people that we work with, and our friends. And think back to the first moment when you friended your long-lost girlfriend, your long-lost boyfriend on Facebook. Or that moment when you discovered that you could follow Ashton Kutcher's every movement on Twitter. All of these moments combined are the moments when the world really started to form this giant network, this network that we're all really connected in today. If I think about the need, if I had to find a babysitter today, I could go to my neighborhood's Facebook group and probably very easily find a neighborhood person to watch my kids. Or if I want to find a new job, I'd probably go to my LinkedIn network and use my connections there to help me find a new job. My kids just started playing Minecraft. Anybody else play Minecraft or have kids that play Minecraft? So if you're familiar with Minecraft, there's a vibrant Minecraft community out there where there's no shortage of videos and forums for you to interact with other people and ask questions, or live stream somebody playing Minecraft right this very moment. There's really no barriers anymore to people creating or consuming content. I can pretty much reach out and find anybody in the world and connect with them based on interests that I might have. Yet, many of the companies today, both large and small, still have not really adapted and figured out how to capitalize on the dynamic nature that these networks have provided in our personal lives. Chris Lapping, he's the CIO of Red Robin. He has one of my favorite quotes. He says, "In today's economy, it's no longer about the big companies eating the small. It's about the fast companies eating the slow." And you see, the fast companies are the ones that have really adapted themselves to being more responsive to their employees and their partners and their customers. And they don't operate in a rigid hierarchy anymore. They capitalize on the open flow of information. So kind of to your point in the back, they've understood that by having an open flow of communication, that they allow their organizations to learn and respond much more quickly. And this open flow of information is really why Satya posted towards the end of 2013. He posted this kind of year-end recap of Microsoft technologies. And one of the things that he highlighted here was Delve, the importance of Delve and the Office Graph to Microsoft. And why is that? Why did Satya point this out? It's really because at Microsoft, we understand that the Office Graph is one of those transformative technologies that can help companies become much more agile and responsive to the needs of our customers and partners and employees. So before we get too much further, like I said, I've been working at the I've been manning the Office 365 booth over the last couple days, and there have been several people that have come up to me and said, no idea what Delve is, no idea what the Office Graph is. So we're just going to take a couple of minutes and just level set and help people understand a little bit about the Office Graph, and then we'll get into a little bit about Delve. So the Office Graph is really this intelligent fabric that lies beneath Office 365. I think of the Office Graph as this fabric that's constantly absorbing the interactions and the activity that people are taking across the Office 365 suite. And this fabric stitches together all the pieces of content and all the interactions that people have with one another so that we can present things that are most relevant to you. So how does the Office Graph work? Now, we're not going to get into the bits and bytes of how the Office Graph stitches all these things together. There's actually a session at 5 o'clock today, really great session with some MVPs and Bill Baer and Alex Cipriani, where they're going to actually take the graph APIs and build some apps on the fly. So if you're interested, I encourage you to check out that session. But when we think about a person in their workplace, we generally can bucket the things that they work on or the things that they interact with into 3 buckets: documents, people, and conversations. And those documents they can be documents that I'm working on individually, or they can be documents that I'm working on with the team. Those people that I work with, it could be my manager or a direct report, or perhaps I'm working on a team or project and I'm connected to those people. The conversations that I'm having, whether that be Lync or Skype for Business or Outlook or Yammer, all of those things are comprised of my work environment. And you notice on this particular depiction, you see some locks on the screen, indicating that there are certain things that I have permission to see that perhaps other people don't have. So one thing the graph is doing is it's very smart about knowing and displaying only those things that I have permission to see in my feed. All the while, around me, the graph continues to stitch more and more of that fabric, even on the outer edges of those, kind of on the periphery of my own personal network, continuing to stitch together more and more of the content and the people and the conversations and the collaboration elements that are happening within the network, within my organization. All of these things are signals that are used to inform the graph and help make sure that I'm seeing the most relevant content at all times. And these are just a sampling of some of the signals that we present today within the Office Graph, or that are used to inform the Office Graph. Now, Gary, usually it's at this point in the conversation that people say, well, what if there are certain things that I don't want people to see?
Right. So I spend a lot of my time actually talking to folks about security, compliance around Office 365 and Delve. And so this conversation comes up a lot. And we just wanted to be really clear with a couple of bullets here. So Delve is never going to change permissions. The underlying permissions will persist. So lots of you guys are aware of that. People aren't going to see things that they're not permissioned to. So documents that are private, when you place information in your private folders, they'll remain private. And then the view is tailored to those permissions and how it's outlined underneath the fabric of that. And then we give some control to administrators and to individual users. I'll show you in the real tenant where to sort of make these changes on, do you want to participate in the graph or not? And does your company want to use the graph or not, as you're thinking about that culture change that was mentioned earlier and what that looks like. So at a tenant level and at an individual level, you'll be able to make those changes. And then you have this. They didn't show this in any of the other sessions, right? So we get cool points for this, right? We want to add some new flavors here. So you do have the ability to hide information from Delve. So there may be some scenarios where there's information that's going to be in the graph anyway, but you don't want it to be surfaced in Delve. You can think of a few of these, maybe an HR scenario where there's some HR data that may show up inside the graph, but you don't want it to inadvertently show up in someone else's Delve view and expose that information. So I put a link at the bottom there. I think you guys will be getting the deck, and you can click through and see the information on how to create this. If we can hold questions to the end, but we will take yours.
So one of the things that I've noticed in early playing is you see content that people may not realize they have exposed. And it occurs to me that what's missing is something analogous to going to Facebook and saying, show me what someone who I don't know sees about me. Have you thought of applying that same sort of thing to Delve to allow you to look at yourself to see what you've exposed inadvertently so that you can take prescriptive means to change that?
So the comment was that Delve essentially will surface to an organization its governance or lack of governance in the environment, right? So essentially, if you don't have a good governance model and there's lots of things that are permissioned incorrectly, Delve will surface that. Actually, we think that's a good thing, right? The request was, can we add a view that says, sort of like Facebook, show me how other people see me, or show me how my friends see me versus how someone public sees me. That's good feedback. Take that to the team. I think the governance point is a good one. I think it's good exposure so that folks can go and lock down documents and understand what their information management system looks like. But that's great feedback. We'll take that, and I'll share it with the team to see what they think on that. So let's move forward on that one.
So, Gary, why don't we walk through some scenarios in which people can actually use Delve? What does it look like to use Delve in a kind of day-to-day scenario? I know you have a situation here where you can kind of show what a typical, the way a typical worker might function today.
Sure, yeah. So this is typically how we work today. Before Delve, and folks that aren't using Delve, this is the scenario we find ourselves in. So we have here a document library. It could be a OneDrive or team site. I have another one here. We're all working across different teams on different documents, and they all tend to be in different repositories. Maybe there's some videos that are part of a project that we're looking at. We're also going to look at Yammer and have some Yammer conversations, and we're also going to look at information and attachments from email, etc. This is the world we live in, right? And then in the end, when we have to triage all these documents through all these document libraries, look for what exactly we're looking for. If I come to this document library, I know there's a document in here I need, but I don't know which one it is. So in the end, after having all of this information exposed to me, what do I end up doing? I go to a search dialog box, and then I search. How many people sort of work like this today? Not to mention file shares. You get a power break just for working like this. I mean, this is unbelievable that you do this, right?
Not to mention when I'm working on a document and I save it to some random SharePoint site that I maybe just got invited to. I hit it once, and then I got to think, where did I save that stupid document at? I remember it was on some SharePoint site. I got to rely on my history, wasting all my time looking for this document, right?
That's absolutely right. And so when I talk to customers, I always point out to them that Delve sort of solves for all of that. So what I did is I went through my Delve interface here, and I just opened up all of these libraries that Delve was showing me in this one view. And you saw that was maybe just the first 10 tabs, right? And it took me to all these disparate locations where I have discrete information where it didn't point out to me exactly what I needed, as Delve is doing. It just took me to that library, and then I have to sort of finagle and waste time looking for what I think is appropriate to me, where Delve surfaces that information right away in these wonderful, beautiful cards that you guys see. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, I know there's a lot that are familiar. These are the cards that give you visual cues of the information that is available that Delve is surfacing up to you. And using that information that we talked about earlier in the Office graph, it's looking at the activity that you've performed, what your coworkers have done, what you're working on, and surfacing that information that's relevant to you. So I can see here that I modified this document. In this case, I'm Garth. I'm not really him, but pretend I am. I can see how many times something's been viewed, what kind of document it is, etc. And then I can have interactions with these things if I feel that's appropriate. One of the things I like to show as well is the responsive design that we've made here, right? So as I adjust the browser here, let me go back down and do that. The interface will adjust, and you see new tiles show up or new cards show up, and it's a nice responsive design. So that gives you an idea if you're using this on another device, the design will respond to the device and curtail itself to that scenario.
Gary, and one of the other things that the team went to kind of painstaking efforts around was to make this very visual, right? Can you talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
why they did that?
So we wanted to give users an indication of how they get to information and make decisions on it really quickly. So you can see the information that's displayed in the card. Typically, people remember things visually and not necessarily by what they read. And so they can get a quick indication of what that information is and make a quick decision on that's what I need or that's what I don't need, and also take actions right away based on what's there. So you can see here the Yammer indication. I can have a conversation around that, which we'll do in a minute. I can email and see some other things. But one of the things I always tell my customers as I'm talking to them about culture shift and how we make the move into making this effective in the way that I work is that Delve is the place that I start my day in. So I used to be an Outlook person. I was working on Exchange since 1995. So Outlook, and back then it was called Exchange, the actual client, for those of you that remember. Then we went to Outlook. I'm a huge Outlook fan. I always spent my time in Outlook and still do to a bit. But I start my day here to see what information my colleagues are working on, what I need to work on right away. And so I immediately come to Delve. And one of the ways you can do that, if you sort of want to make that move, is to go into Office 365 settings, go to Start Page, and you can make your Start Page Delve.
How many of you guys have Delve as your start page today?
And so right away, you can move into Delve and get to a place where when you go to portal.office.com, you automatically land on the place that's going to give you information that you're looking for and that's readily available to you, and you can start your day in a really productive way. So I love to do that, and I show our customers how to do that. If we walk through some of the areas that we have here in Delve, you have the home. You have the home slide there, and what this is showing is information that I've modified, things that have been modified by colleagues that I'm working with, and information around me in my environment that sort of makes sense to me in terms of what I'm going to be consuming and using going forward. So I see the information here around SharePoint OneDrive business value, regional sales report, all this information from different people. In this case, it's Pavel, some things that I've modified, and obviously as I scroll down, I see some other things there that are available to me. You can interact with this content really easily. Obviously, if you click on that SharePoint document there, I can go to it in the web apps, modify it, etc. So the content is available to me. I can interact with it. Again, I don't have to go to a separate portal as we saw in that beginning demonstration of all these different tabs that are open. I can easily get to the content, interact with it, make the changes that I want to make, and continue to move forward. If I wanted to have a Yammer conversation around this document, I could do that as well. And so here I could just click on Yammer, choose the location that I wanted to post to, post what information that I wanted to, and then we're having a conversation around this document. And folks that are using Yammer and looking at this Yammer group will participate in that conversation. So my entry point was from Delve. Folks that are in Yammer right now will continue to have that conversation in Yammer, and we can both participate from a place that makes sense for both of us in terms of the way we work. So it's really helpful in terms of being able to interact with this content immediately, and not just a landing page that's showing you a bunch of pretty pictures It gives you the ability to actually get things done versus looking for information across all those different silos that we saw earlier. And let's not even talk about file shares, right? Where things are expiring or things have a bunch of different versions and they're very hard to control. So Delve gets you to a place that makes sense for you. Let's take a quick look at the Me area. So the Me area is showing the information that I've modified and I've been working with. And you'll see some other things here that we'll talk about in a bit in terms of what your profile is. But my activity here in the Me area is showing me everything that I'm working on. So if I wanted to get to a quick place of understanding all the documents that I'm working on, most of you probably save information all day, every day, and don't always remember where you saved it to, right? And so this area is going to give you a good indication of how to get information right away without you having to worry about, did I save it to my OneDrive? Did I save it locally? Did I save it somewhere else? It'll automatically take you to the information that's most relevant to you at that time, which is pretty nice. Let's talk a little bit about boards and how that makes sense. So I got asked a lot on the exhibit floor, when should I create a team site versus when should I create a board versus when should I use something else? How many folks are sort of struggling and wondering about that? So you can imagine a bunch of different scenarios. So as I work with customers out in the field, there's a bunch of different scenarios that make sense. So boards is a way to aggregate information and curate it. And typically, you're going to do this ad hoc. And so you can gather information together, make it visual, and it's open to the community. And so one of the scenarios that I had recently was an M&A scenario, right? And in an M&A scenario, there's the legal team that may have their own team site, and they're working on legal documentation and possibly contracts. You have IT that's working on how they're going to integrate these two companies. There's a bunch of different areas. You have procurement. There's a bunch of different areas of the company that may have their own team site related to this same project, but can't necessarily share all the information across those boundaries. The legal team is not going to share all the contracts with IT, et cetera, but there's information across the entire project that everyone should have some ability to see. And what they did was create a board around that M&A activity. And so because, remember, Delve is respecting the underlying permissions, things that you can't see won't show up in your board. And things that are public to everyone absolutely do show up there. So what they did was create a board about that project that had a finite date in terms of when the M&A was going to be done. And all of that information shows up on the board, and it already security trims it for you. So you can think about scenarios like that. Manufacturing is another scenario that I saw recently. And I'm sure, Steve, you've probably seen some of your own. You can think about how to build a car. The people are responsible for different parts of that car. And they may be working on different specs. And they're not necessarily sharing those specs across their own team sites. But in the end, they all want to see the view of how is this car going to come together. And maybe they build a board on that car. So you get the idea that team sites are discretely for one scenario, where something like this can give you a larger view to things you probably don't have insight on each team site.
I was working with the learning and development team, and you can imagine a learning and development group. They're constantly kind of mining content or mining people's presentations or documents. They were actually using Delve as a way to find content that people were creating, and let's say it was a sales training. They would add it to a sales training board. And so that way they could use that as a team to pull all those things together, kind of collate and curate those things. And then they would use that to make a structured course out of it. But it was a way for them as a team to look across the network at the kind of sales training type content that existed.
And as you guys have seen before, adding information to a board is pretty easy. You just start typing, and if it was previously created, you get that information that pops up for you. So here's sales performance. I can add it to that board. I go over to the board, and right away that document shows up there again. And by the way, because this is open to the community, if you just right-click, you can remove from board. Now, one thing to keep in mind with boards is that anyone can remove anything from the board, right? This is a community environment, so essentially anyone can remove something. So keep that in mind as you're building boards.
So Gary, another typical question that comes up here is, if I don't have permission to see a particular document in a board,
it will not show up for you, right? So we're respecting those underlying permissions. And again, you can unfollow a board when you're done with that project, as we talked about earlier. And you can send a link out to a board to share it for other people to see.
Item B on more than one board.
Say a question here?
Item B on more than one
Absolutely. So an item can be on more than one board. So here you can see this Excel sheet happens to be on a couple of boards actually. And if I right-click and say remove from board, it'll let me select which one I want to remove it from. So I can just remove this one, say OK with that, and now it's still on the sales performance board, but it has been removed from the demo board. So you can interact with those and make those adjustments as you need to. Pretty nice. Or folks using boards out there, are they making sense for you? You're not using boards?
Anybody have good examples of how they're using boards, or any particular way you're proud of using a board?
Or a better question, what's preventing you from using them? Nothing yet, you just haven't created them, right? So maybe we gave you some good ideas there on where they make sense, right? Because the question around team sites is the one that always comes up. When do I use it? When do I not? Yeah, there's a question up front here.
Any way that in the future you're planning to add some sort of group model on top of this, like hand limit who can delete things from a board?
So the question was, are we going to add any group models so they can limit who can delete things from a board? I think so groups will be coming to Delve in particular. So so that'll answer some of that. But the idea behind this, though, is to have community input, right? Think about the other scenario. I work in Office. I used to be on the Exchange side. A bunch of things I know about Exchange. When I left that team, I took that intellectual property with me, right? Or my knowledge with me, if you will, right? And then there's a project that spins up around Exchange. If this is sort of secret or private from me, then I can't contribute to what they're working on, right? Maybe I wrote that part of Exchange that they're working on. So I can see the board and say, hey, here's some documentation, here's some information that makes sense in the scenarios that you're looking at because I had some ability to see that board is out there, right? So again, back to what Steve was talking about in the beginning, working like a network, you want information to be available to everyone and not necessarily keep it private. Yeah, question?
But by design, boards aren't like you don't have to build an architecture like on SharePoint. It's just throw it up, use it, delete it, and we move on. It's kind of this like organic thing, and there's no need to worry about all that because it's company growth that doesn't.
So the question was, you don't have to spend any time building an architecture and understanding your design of boards. You just do it ad hoc and sort of on the fly and then remove them as necessary. Yes, that's correct. Yes.
I think from a user experience standpoint, that's very intentional. We want to try to make curation and we want to try to make connections between people and content very friction-free. So providing a user experience such that people can do that in an easy fashion. If you think about kind of the old ways of creating metadata around a site or metadata around a document in SharePoint, that was kind of a tricky thing for a regular user to do. So we want to try and make it a lot easier.
There's another question up front here. We're going to go with the questions since we're getting them.
Is the experience around either searching for or finding a board?
So so the question was, what's the experience around searching for a board? So there I just typed in sales and the sales performance board comes right up. And discovering the board when it wasn't one you created or something like that, right? So again, the graph is receiving those signals.
But is that a filter or is that a search?
That's a search. So I'm searching.
Search that fast?
Yeah. Well, there's not a ton of content in here, right? So yours might be, your mileage will vary on the speed of the search there, right? But essentially, I just typed it in. It's going to give you some of that information up front. Again, you'll see some hit highlighting as you saw there, and then you can get right to that board. And again, if the activity is happening around you, remember the graph is pulling in all those signals, and that information will surface up to you in terms of, hey, this is a board you might be interested in. So you'll get that information. Question there. We'll come back. So the question was, how does the user figure out what's been changed in the board? You will get notified. You get notified on those mobile devices, certainly, that something has changed that you're following. So you'll get that information that the board has changed. And obviously, you can always come back, which is what you don't want to do in that scenario, right?
I think to your point, though, I think that could probably be improved.
It could be, yeah. In this UI, there is no notification that shows you, hey, something has changed. But right now, you cannot. So the question was, can you reorder the board by date modified? It's going to be by activity and what sort of makes the most sense. If you read something, that'll sort of come up first. One more question before we move on. You had a second follow-up.
Since this is
So the question was, are there ways for the admins to merge boards that actually have the same content? Today, no. The same document can be part of multiple boards, and you have sort of similar looking boards. Yeah, today there isn't. Again, because it's ad hoc. You're sort of building on the fly as necessary, then following and unfollowing.
We do hope by providing the type ahead when creating the board that mitigates some of that. Understand that it can still happen, but the type ahead helps a little bit.
Another quick thing I wanted to show, just from a ease of use perspective, is this show tips option. Some of you are probably familiar with it, but those of you who are not, if you just click on show tips, it'll walk you through what each one of the areas means and how you interact with it. So as you're shifting from that old style of work, moving into using Delve, and your end users are going to have this new experience, you probably want to give them some guided information on how to interact with that. So this will tell me what's on the home page. I can click next, and it'll tell me you can search here and do some more information. Same thing will happen on the other sort of areas of Delve if you have show tips showing up. So let's walk a little bit through this me area. So it's showing me, as I said earlier, the information that I've been modifying and I've been working on. It also gives me some indication to see information that's been related to me around the people that I've been working with. And you've had some experience, Steve, with people. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and how do we pivot on that?
Yeah, so I think some scenarios in which this has been helpful for folks is, let's say I'm getting ready to have a meeting with Bonnie, as an example. I can click on Bonnie, and the great thing is I can go to her feed, and I can kind of see what's been top of mind for Bonnie, what has she been working on, and get a view for what's been relevant in her world, so that when I come to meet her, I can maybe have a conversation with her about those things. I actually had heard of another person, he was starting a new job, and he was interviewing with the boss, internal. It was an internal person. He was interviewing internally for that position. So he went to that person's Delve feed, was able to get some insight about what the team and what the project was that he was going to be moving to, was working on, and he felt like he was much more educated and was able to have a much more deep conversation about that job. He ended up getting the job. Now, I'm not saying that was exactly the reason, but he definitely felt more comfortable as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I use this all the time in my daily work. In a place like Microsoft, 150,000 folks that work at Microsoft, we work with a lot of people that we don't necessarily meet in person. So I always go to Delve, pivot on their profile, and understand what are they working on, who are they, can I have more context about this person, so when I meet them in a meeting, I have a more contextual-based understanding of who they are, what they're doing, and how we relate to each other. If they're showing up here as related to you, you can imagine you have similar things that you're working on in common, and there's some things that you're sharing. Yeah, Steve.
And I think this gets to that cultural piece, because it's a really important part of discovery. I've heard some people say you really don't have to change the way that you work in order for the Office Graph and for Delve to be beneficial to you, and that's partially true. But in order for Delve to really be beneficial and really be impactful to your organization, people have to be sharing in such a way that they're sharing it publicly or more openly, or places that that the Office Graph can pick up, so that they can be surfaced in a way in Delve for other people to discover. Yes.
Are there trend reporting things, advancements that you see a higher level of what the organization's working on?
We're going to come back to that. In the What's Coming section, we'll touch on that. The question was, is there information about trends or what people are accessing or what people are doing? We'll come back to that question.
So a couple other things about the Office Graph. So the Office Graph is not only in Delve, it also shows up in Office 365 Video. In this section here that says you might also like, that's being powered by the graph, and it's looking at the information, again, in the activity around you and the activity around your colleagues to give you this information about what you might also like or what else is relevant to you. The other place where you see information from the graph popping up is in Clutter Inbox inside of Outlook. How many folks are using the Clutter feature inside of Outlook? So what Clutter does, for those who are not familiar, it'll start looking at your behavioral patterns, and it starts moving things out of your purview that it thinks are relevant to you. So when I never answer Steve's email, it moves all of Steve's email to the Clutter inbox, right? And I don't have to look at it, right?
Which really happens.
It happens all the time. So either Steve is not important to me or I've been too busy. And again, if something goes in there mistakenly, you can right-click and sort of unclutter it. But again, the graph is powering everything across the environment, as Steve said earlier, and you're getting information that's relevant to you contextually across the product line.
And this is one of the key things that we really want to impress upon everyone is that Office 365 really does become that fabric, as we described it earlier, across the entire Office 365 service. So like Gary just showed, it's showing up within Office Video, it's showing up within Outlook Online, but you'll also start to see the Office Graph start to inform things like Yammer. So today in Yammer, you might see that you have suggested groups. That's largely based off of interactions that are happening solely within Yammer. But we hope to expand that to start to include more of the signals from the Office Graph to have even more relevant suggested groups within Yammer. That's just one of the examples.
Awesome. So let's pivot over to the profile that's also a part of Delve. And this is going to be your Office profile, essentially replacing what you used to go to in SharePoint. So this will be your one profile in Office. And you can see here all the information around me in this scenario that I'm Garth Forth. Most of this information is coming from Active Directory, but some of it you're going to go ahead and edit yourself. For example, the skills information, in the same way you filled out your SharePoint profile, is coming from the information that I entered in there in terms of what Garth's skills are. And then other information around organization, contact, etc., is coming from your Active Directory information. So this is going to be your one profile. And as was said in the roadmap session, typically the only profile people fill out is their LinkedIn profile. So we're looking at ways of how do we sort of pull that information if it's necessary and show it in this view here, right? Because people don't tend to update their work profile for obvious reasons and why LinkedIn gets updated. Again, you can go to someone's profile, one of your colleagues, see their information, contact them through messaging, through calling, through email. Again, all of those work. So pretty nice there. Let's go back over to the home page and do another pivot on people and take another look. And again, as we pivot through all these people, we can go and find that information around all of your colleagues. Are people using this, looking at their colleagues' information and seeing what they're working on and getting to that document pretty easily, or is that not happening with Delve? In the back, yes, that's happening. You're finding that scenario. Again, this is one of the things that I do all the time is I know that actually if one of my colleagues, Neil, was working on something in Office 365. He wasn't around. He was out of office. I went over to his profile page. It was the second document that came up. That was sort of my big realization about pivoting on people. So that's what we're finding, that initially we were focused on the content, then we were moving to people and groups and organizations, which we'll talk about a little bit, and we're getting to that place. All right, let's sort of move forward here. Show you a couple other things. So if I go over here to share activity, talking about the permissioning piece here, this is where you can say, I don't want to participate or have my content show up in Delve. So individually, if you don't want your information to show up in Delve, once you click this, you essentially will be removed. And that information, if someone comes to your profile, they'll see the generic profile information, but they won't see the activity and they won't see any of the other information being fed into Office 365. The other place, was there a question there? Yeah. So the question was, can that be overridden? Right now, no. The only other place to make that change around Office Graph is here, where I'm going to the Office 365 portal as an admin. I go over to Settings, Office Graph, and I can say Allow or Don't Allow Access. And this is where you can either turn off Delve completely or allow it. So you can allow it at the organizational level, and then the individual users have their choice of participating or not participating. Right? This is for user productivity, not necessarily the organization saying you have to work this way. Right? So we have to instruct users that there's a benefit to working this way versus what I showed on that first screen of having all these different silos of information, not just siloed teams. Remember, it's siloed information as well. Yeah. Yeah, so Delve will not show up without getting information from the graph. So essentially, it's Delve. That's a good question. The question was, will the "you might like this" not work either? And I believe the answer to that is no as well, but I'll check on that one for you. There was another question on the side there. Yeah. I'm sorry, say again? Say again? The board? It's in the graph as well. Yeah. Yes. So the question was the boards, where's that information coming from? That's in the graph as well.
Yeah, the other thing to consider about the Office graph itself is it's not really storing the content. It's really just it's just pulling all the metadata and bringing all that together. So all you're seeing, so Delve is really just the presentation layer, pulling from the Office graph, pulling all those signals from the Office graph and putting it in a nice GUI here. But it's not really pulling the content into it, linking to it.
So let's show a little bit about what mobile looks like in the graph.
So this exists today. This is the Delve app on the iPhone. And I just want to show a quick example of how I've been using Delve even over the last couple of days. So I have a couple of sessions here at Ignite today, tomorrow, and Thursday. So I have three presentations that I've been working on. And you can see up in the top left, that's the Office Graph and Delve session that you're currently in. And then I've got the two other ones. So this is the My Work section of the app. And so it knows, these are the things that have been most important to me, so it brings them to the top of my feed. The great thing about that is that it allows me to quickly access. So, those bus rides have been kind of brutal lately, right? So they take a long time, so I can be sitting on the bus, I can be going through and reviewing my presentation on the go, and I don't have to go through and search through a bunch of I don't have to go searching through a bunch of sites or searching through a big file directory. They're very, very easily able to access those files on the go. So just wanted to show you that.
And what kind of actions can you take if you go
Oh,
back
sure.
to
Yeah,
those
sorry about that.
segments?
So if I go back here, if I...
Just click on the dock again. Yeah, there you go.
Yep. So when I click on the arrow here, oops, sorry. I can copy the link, so maybe I want to just send it over SMS. I can share it with folks, or I can even edit it, which will open the corresponding PowerPoint or Excel or whatever application it is on my device. So I have those options on the go as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Everyone using the Android and iOS apps? When is it coming for iPad? I don't know that, but we will take that question, yeah. Windows Phone, we're working on a universal app for Windows Phone. So Windows 10 universal app, that's when we get it. I want it too. I have my 1520, and I've been waiting for it. Yeah, question in the back. It does. So one of the other places, so you get information from SharePoint, from regular SharePoint team sites, from OneDrive, from email, Exchange essentially, not necessarily Outlook, right? It doesn't. So right now you see attachments from Outlook. You see links in Yammer. So it's looking at objects, not necessarily activity, right? So an object in Yammer is the link, not necessarily the conversation we have. And then the attachment in an email. And again, that's going to be marked as private by default. If you and I exchange an email, that attachment would only be visible to you and I. It's not visible to the larger community, which makes sense. If we decided on the tool line that these are the addressable people, essentially you're permissioning it by that, and those people will be able to see that, not everyone else. And you can't pin those things to a board, by the way. Folks knew that you can't pin the email and the attachments to a board. Right. Follow up? On his mobile view? I believe those are documents that you were showing there.
Those are the presentations that I've been working on for Ignite.
Yeah.
And so I've been working on them over the last couple of weeks. And so Delve knows that those are important to me or those are recent, and it pulled those to the top. Yeah, one more question?
What's the scenario? Someone else seeing what they're working on?
Like I'm thinking about it from like a manager standpoint, and being able to see what people have been working on and see what's going
There's nothing here for that particular scenario. Remember, Delve is about individuals looking at information relevant to them or other individuals, not necessarily a manager or an organizational lead looking at the organization, which we'll talk about in a second, right? But this particular interface is about how do I make myself more productive, how do I make each individual more productive and share information more broadly, rather than have someone looking over that information.
But there's no link at that level, I guess what I'm saying. There's no way for, if I'm a network technician, another network technician, and we're working on a similar project,
Yeah.
or not active project, speaking similar tasks, there's no way to link those kind of things.
No, not by an admin linking them together. They would have to be related by activity, and then they would show up in each other's Delves.
So the other thing I would add to that is that I think over the last year, we announced Office Graph and Delve at the SharePoint conference last year. And I'd say over this past year plus, the Office Graph and Delve has largely been focused on content and documents specifically. We are now seeing, and this is what Gary is going to describe, is we are seeing many more things start to come together, like those people, content, and conversations. It's starting to become more rich. We're also going to, Gary's just going to talk in a little bit about the APIs and the ability to extend the Office Graph to other applications or have other applications report into the Office Graph, so to speak. So that might start to address your scenario also.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the initial iteration, we've been focused on content, and you've seen us start to pivot now to people with the profile page and some of the things you saw in the roadmap session and some of the other Delve sessions focusing around people. What we've seen in our data on how folks are using Delve is that typically they'll go over to a person to say, hey, what is this person working on? Or I remember we were working on a document together, but I don't remember the document name, but I do remember who I was working on it with. So it's easy to go and pivot on that person, see all the information that they're working on, and likely you'll find that document right away. And then the next evolution of that is groups, and you guys have seen across all the different sessions here in Office all the exposure and talk about groups. So groups will be part of it as well, where you can go to a Delve group page essentially and see calendar information, OneDrive information, Yammer feeds, the OneNotes that are coming from that particular team site that the group developed. A little bit hard to see in this view there, but it's there. And then lastly, organizations. That talks a little bit to the scenario that was just described about those workers. So here's that group insight. Again, a little bit of a better view of what that will look like. And if you wanted to see sort of a live demo, again, watch the recording of the roadmap. And you can see there the calendar information, the OneDrive information, the group notes that are being taken together, the email conversations, if you will, etc. And then the last one was around organization, to get a better look at, for yourself in this case, around the organization, how many meetings you've been on, what your work-life balance is looking like, make a better assessment of how things are connected in terms of, if you look at the top left, you have meetings there with the different types of people in the organization, sales, marketing, and product team, and you'll be able to see by the intensity of the lines how those meetings are related. So the thicker lines mean there's deeper connections there, and the thinner lines means there's not as deep a connection, and make some inferences and gain some analytics around your organization, essentially. And then extensibility, we've been talking about this for a while. I think there was a session today, or there's been a couple of sessions around building applications on Office Graph and Delve. But the idea here is you'll be able to bring information into the graph. We think the more information is in the graph, the more valuable it becomes. So bringing in third-party sources, your own line of business applications there. You see on those cards, I think there's a Salesforce and Trello card there that's visual there. And so making those APIs available, having those connections come into the graph, and then that information being fed up into the graph. I know there was a little bit of confusion in one of the SharePoint sessions around, was Delve coming to an on-premises environment? The answer to that is no. The way we'll do that is by having a connector, which you'll be able to connect the information from on-premises. The metadata will be ingested into the Office Graph in the cloud, and then you'll see a representation of that information show up in the graph and in Delve in the cloud. But there will not be a specific Delve product on premises, so we can clear that up. I know there's a little bit of confusion going around about that. Some session in SharePoint, they were saying that. Yes?
Maybe this is implied when you say Delve will not come on-prem. Is that also implying Office Graph
I think that might be the better way to say it is Office Graph is not going to come on-prem. So the engine that powers Delve, it needs to operate in the cloud just because of the sheer horsepower of all the processing that is required. We're not going to bring that on-prem.
Yeah, so remember what's making these sort of inferences and the analytics behind that is Azure Machine Learning is looking at all the signals that the graph is consuming and then making some decisions based on that on what's showed to you. And to power Azure Machine Learning takes an enormous amount of compute power.
So you might consume it through Delve on-prem, but all the Office Graph
That's correct. So you could consume it through Delve. So imagine the scenario you have, let's say a SharePoint on-premises, you use the SharePoint hybrid deployment with a connector. Your SharePoint on-premises documents can stay on-premises. We'll see a representation of them through the metadata that's being ingested in the graph. So you can see a card essentially like that. That's an on-premises document. You click through on it, and you go to on-premises, not to the cloud. Question?
What's the implication of the profile that you were showing earlier that is an office-based profile, so obviously cloud-based, and the on-prem? Will there be any carryover of that functionality towards on-prem, maybe not based on off-the-box?
So the question was, what's the implication of the profile we showed earlier and on-prem if you happen to be in a hybrid scenario, right? I guess that's your question, right? How do you reconcile the two profiles? Yeah, that's something we're working on now. Obviously, in those hybrid scenarios, where do you host a profile? Is it in the cloud? Is it on-premises? How do you manipulate that? Yeah. So we'll release more information on that going forward. Question in the back?
I have members that I want to collaborate with that are outside, not even federated. For example, I simply exchange email with someone else who is participating or should be viewed as being participating in this group.
What if you work with people outside the organization is the question. And I guess your question is, will they see any of this, or will the information show up in Delve about external users? Is that the question? Yes? So no, so the external users won't be seen here. The underlying technology that you use to share information is where you'll see the representation of that person. So if you use OneDrive to share information externally, you'll see that you'll stay and see information within OneDrive. Delve will not show that external person as someone showing up there or activities with that person.
One thing that did occur.
Same thing with emails. So that won't show up in Delve either if it's an external person.
One thing that did happen to me, so one of the presentations I'm working on is with somebody that's outside Microsoft, and I was sharing I shared my presentation from my OneDrive out to her, and I hadn't actually been checking in on the presentation, and I was in Delve one day, and it said, Tammy has modified the document. So that was my signal. It's like, oh wow, Tammy made some changes to it. So I actually went in and looked at it, and so Delve the Office Graph was smart enough to know that Tammy had permission to make modifications to it, and I was able to see that.
Yes, question there before we move on.
Two related questions. Number one, can you apply retention policies to this content that the company is now collecting about everybody's activities, for legal purposes or other purposes? So this is actually record that calls on litigation.
So the question was, how can you apply retention? So remember, Delve is just showing you a visual representation of the information that's being collected from other sources. So within SharePoint and within Exchange, you would use the Unified Compliance Center to create your deletion or retention policies, and those will continue to be true here. Right? So Delve will have no impact on what's happening underneath. So you would set up your company-wide or enterprise-wide retention policies on emails and documents and IM conversations, and those will persist no matter what you see in Delve.
So it's continuously updating, so when that information is removed from Exchange, it gets removed from Graph.
Yeah, so we have this concept of ignore. So the question is it continuously updating, and will it just leave the graph or leave Delve, essentially? It won't leave the graph. We have this concept of ignore. So things will age out as they're no longer pertinent to you, right? So as you no longer click on something or you move away from it, it will age out of your view. But the metadata is still in the graph. Yes, question? Yeah.
How does it separate personal interaction from business interaction? Because people using company technology also engage in personal communication.
So the question was, how does it separate personal information from business interaction? And again, If you're sending personal emails out, the graph is not going to have any concept if that person is, because they're not an AD essentially, right? So there'll be no representation of that information showing up for you or for someone else to see if they're outside. If you're collaborating with someone else, in the scenario that Steve mentioned, then that document will show up as you modifying it. But if you're sending emails to someone outside the organization, that's not going to show up as something that's relevant to anyone other than you, and you'll see that in your inbox. No, it won't keep track of that. If there's an attachment that's relevant for you, you'll see it yourself, but no one else will see it. And again, if there's a OneDrive document that's relevant to you and you shared with the external person, you'll see it because it's in your OneDrive, but no one else will see it. It'll just be you. That external person has no other way of seeing that. So let's show in the what's coming section one quick thing that they didn't show in the roadmap. They talked about it a little bit, and that's the ability to do sort of natural language search. So I'm here on this site here, and I just start typing Steve, and the first person that comes up is this young man here, Steve Wen. And how does it know that? Well, it knows by who I've been working with most recently and what I've been working on, that this is probably the Steve that I'm looking for. So I can just click on the different options. It gives me what popular documents around Steve, and I can see right away it starts to show me that information, including some of the sessions that he was working on. You see the cards of that information there. And then I can continue to type information around who else, and I can see that Chris Eckelmeyer is the second person that shows up there, another one of my colleagues, and Christian. So it knows immediately who I've been working with recently, what I've been working on, etc., which makes it really cool in terms of searching for information. Sometimes we don't get the syntax correct, sometimes we don't get the keyword correct, and it's hard for us to find that information. But the natural language queries that will be coming to Delve helps with that. If I sort of go back here and just go to Steve, I can also look at who's he working with, people that are around him. And again, the graph would immediately show me that information and all the pivots around the people that Steve. So this is a good visual representation of some of the signals that have been coming into the graph that we showed you earlier, the documents that are around him, the people that are around him, and how these things actually show up in Delve. You can see that information represented right here. You had a question? So the question was, someone asked about recently modified documents. Can you use natural language to look that up? I'm not sure if we have anything about recently used documents. Documents modified by, let's look up last modified, I guess. I don't see anything for last modified there. But I'm sure that'll be something that we'll be adding, right? If it's a capability or essentially a property in SharePoint, as you can imagine, you can look for author, you can look for last modified, but yeah, you get the idea. No. It'll just show modified by me.
And we started to see kind of previews of this also showing up in Windows 10 and Cortana during the keynote, where you're able to ask Cortana, you're able to ask Windows 10, show me all the presentations around the United Way fair, whatever the example was. But so this is informing those types of features.
Okay, so let's move forward here. Any other questions? Yeah.
So was that homepage modifiable or editable at all? For example, if corporate communications wanted a part of it that showed just news or a specific type of content, is that possible to do, or that page is locked? It's controlled by OfficeGraph?
Yeah, right now it's locked. There may be some ability to change it later, but you might want to do that in a portal where you could have sort of your Yammer stream and have other information, corporate news coming through, et cetera. And then you would use things like groups and organization to see other data that the graph is pivoting on. I've got an extra large here for you. Yes? So the question was essentially, is this yet another place I have to go? Right? That's what you're saying, yeah. So that's sort of back to where I started at the beginning, where I was showing you that I start my day there, and all the interactions that I could have had on email, that I could have on Yammer, I just do them all through Delve. Where there's no plans to make Yammer and Delve one thing, or Yammer, Delve, and Outlook one thing. You'll see some of that through the integration of groups that you saw in some of the other sessions, where you'll be able to have group conversations in Outlook and not have to leave, and then have separate conversations in Yammer around Yammer things. But there's no plans right now to integrate Delve and Yammer. But the idea is if you start in Delve, as I showed earlier, you can interact with email, you can interact with documents, you can interact with Yammer, you can do it all from that one interface. At least that's the way I sort of perform my work. You've asked a few questions, so you get a shirt if you want to come up. Say again? Okay. You want the power brick? Okay.
Okay, you have to come to the mic for that one.
You have to say that one at the mic if you want the power brick. You have to come to the mic if you want the power brick. Let's wrap up real quick before you ask your questions. Let's just summarize what we covered, and then we'll take questions.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll just to recap, we talked about kind of the modern workplace, a brief summary, brief overview of how the Office Graph works. Hopefully we also gave you some ideas about how to incorporate Delve into your workflow and how you can incorporate it and use it with your teams. We also went through what's coming. And then here are some of the related sessions. Again, some of them already happened. I would encourage you, again, if you're interested in developing apps against the graph, check out the session at 5 p.m. today. So we'll continue.
And we
to open up for
purposely went over some of the same information that you guys have seen because, again, some folks had not seen anything and some folks are very familiar. We have to sort of land somewhere in the middle. So for those who are already familiar, apologies for anything you saw repeat. Hopefully you saw a couple of things that you hadn't seen before. I tried to throw some of those things in there, like hide from Delve and how to set it to your home page and showing tips and things like that. But thanks for coming out. We'll continue to take questions. Yeah.
Okay. I'm from Germany, so we are always concerned about data privacy, worker council, and stuff like that. Is there any option to change what goes into the graph? If I got it right, signals like opening documents, writing documents go into the graph. Can I switch this stuff off?
So the question was, can you essentially take things out of the graph? So all those signals are being sent to the graph. There is no way right now to remove them from the graph. There is a way to stop them from being displayed, as I showed earlier with hide from Delve, but there's no way to take them out of the graph. Essentially, these signals are already in your environment, right? Mm-hmm. It's already in SharePoint. It's already in Lync. It's already in Exchange. All we're doing is aggregating them in the graph and then showing them this way. So if you don't want them to show up, so you can think of a scenario where their workers' council wouldn't want any performance information to be shown anywhere, right, in Germany. But that information, again, well, it's already in your environment. You just don't have to display it in Delve. And then all the data protection is already part of what we do in Office 365.
Yeah,
right?
we have to do more, to be honest, because we have to switch stuff off. For example, in SharePoint, we do not allow audit logging and stuff like that because you can measure the performance of an employee. And if we have a technical system like the Office Graph that records that somebody has opened a document that violates German law. And
so in that case, you would do what I showed in the beginning and just turn off the graph. So you go into SharePoint settings.
Yeah, sure, but then it's a...
Yeah, you just turn off.
This is what we do right now, but obviously this has a certain value for us. But it would be good to switch off some signals, not everything. But if you could switch, say, these signals I don't want to go into the graph, everything is fine.
Today we don't have that. There's no way to select the signals, but feedback taken. Thank you.
Okay.
Here's your brick. Next question, yeah. Thank you.
Are there plans to extend the Delve functionality to additional content types that are not just document-based, so list items, custom content types, etc.?
There are plans that's in the roadmap to extend beyond documents, so looking at things like wikis and lists and all those things, but no timeline yet, but yes, there are plans.
Awesome.
For that.
Thank
you. I have another shirt here, I think.
Might be a little big for me. Thank you.
Okay. This one is, extra large. It's a little big.
Yeah, so you showed under profiles the opportunity to have your organizational information that of course pulls from Active Directory.
Yeah.
What if you know your information isn't accurate yet, you've got some cleanup to do? Is there a way to turn that off so that you don't expose incorrect, reporting structures?
Yeah,
and
not
hierarchy?
showing that. Yeah, you can not have that displayed in the profile.
But is it all or nothing, or you can actually?
Yeah, it's going to be all or nothing.
Okay, so if you turn that off and you don't want the organizational information, you don't get the rest
Yeah,
of the...
it's all the organization information, not the whole profile. So you can take out the organization information part.
Okay.
Is that the question? Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So when you asked people who was using Delve, a lot of hands didn't go up. Is there any consideration to like a deployment strategy around Delve? Because it is really easy to turn on, but in order to get meaningful information, you have to have like SharePoint Online deployed or Exchange Online deployed. So for example, I went into mine and I only have OneDrive information up there, so all I see is my own things.
Yeah.
So what do companies?
So that's actually what Steve's job is every day.
Is deploying?
He's a customer success manager.
Okay.
And his whole job is to work with companies on how do we use our products to the best of our ability. What does that plan look like? If it's Delve, then you have to have the underlying underpinnings working like SharePoint, OneDrive, so that you can get some fruitful information. Okay. So that's his whole role. We don't charge for that, and he works with our customers to do that. Yeah, he's over there. His whole team, we have a team of folks that do that. Thanks for the question. Do you want an extra large? There you go.
A little bit related there. You had said there's a connector in the works for SharePoint on-site. Is there connectors for other products like Exchange on-premises to get those signals up into Delve?
Well, Exchange Hybrid is there already. So if you're in hybrid, that'll work as well.
Can the mailboxes be on-prem, or do the mailboxes have to be up in the cloud for that?
The mailboxes can be on-prem if you have hybrid.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
What's the timeline for the organization trending that you showed in the what's coming?
We don't have one yet. It's probably going to be into next year.
A year or two, something like that?
Probably into next year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure, thank you. I don't think I have anything left. Sorry, I gave them all.
Regarding the natural language queries that you showed, do you have any plans or a roadmap of supporting other languages than English?
Oh, yeah. So beyond English, we're looking at other language for obviously not everyone's natural language is not English. Yeah. Thank you.
Just a quick question. Again, on-prem cloud scenario. Can you talk a little bit about how an on-prem instance would in fact be able to use the Office Graph? You talked about, I think, some connectors and so on. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. So all we're going to do is ingest the signals. So there'll be opportunities, one, using connectors or using the APIs for you to send on-premises data or line of business data, like, for example, 2 of the properties we just made available is trending around, is one of them. Or I forgot what the second one was at the moment, but you'll be able to send that signal into the cloud. So there's going to be some work on premises, let's say in a line of business, that you'll have to do to enable your application or your content to send signals that the graph can ingest. So we look at things like open, close, modified, liked, but there may be something specific to your line of business app that you want to enable as a property that the graph can consume and understand. So there'll be a little work on your side, on the application side. Things natively like SharePoint, it'll know because we have those signals already. But if there's a line of business app, then there's a little bit of work to be done either by you if it's your custom app or by another provider. Let's say you use a SaaS provider that wanted to talk to us. They would have to enable those signals so that it would work with us.
If you're not an Office 365 customer, can you license Office Graph independently, or you have to be? So you have to have Office 365.
Yes.
Thanks.
Sure.
So we have some custom profile properties. Will we be able to display those on the new profile?
Do you have them in SharePoint today?
Yeah.
Yeah, you should be able to, but if you want to send me an email, it's just gdenoise@microsoft.com. I can validate what will and won't work.
Okay, cool.
First initial, last name @microsoft.com.
Any plans on improving the lemmatization in Office Search?
Say again.
Lemmatization. So you have a really nice lemmatization engine in Azure Search that you don't have in your Office 365 Search.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen anything on that. That's probably the SharePoint guys in the exhibit hall probably can help you with that. I haven't seen anything on it, to be honest with you. Other questions? Yeah?
I was just wondering, for the boards, are you going to have the opportunity to maybe add a description to the board?
Right now, you can't modify what's in the boards. It's just the name that you give it in general.
Yeah.
We're looking at, is there possibly a way to add something to the cards that'll give you a better indicator? Right now, people just change the title names of the doc and add things descriptive like draft or final or that
Oh, I
sort
actually
of
meant
thing.
for, let's say I created a board for gathering all of my type of deliverable across multiple projects. If I could have a description for the board itself, so rather
Yeah.
than just the board title.
Today, other than the name, that's all we
That's it.
have, but it's good feedback.
Okay, great.